everyone to our the first event of this year in the UCI Physical Sciences Science Communication Series. The goal of this series is to provide opportunities for people in our school and beyond to learn from science communication experts about effective strategies for communicating science and creating excitement about science. And we have a fantastic lineup this year that you will hear more about later. And today, we're very fortunate to have Ray Richards here to share her expertise in using art as a mechanism to communicate science. Welcome, Ray.
Hello, hello. I am very, very excited to be here talking with you guys today about a topic that is very dear to me. I'm going to fire up this presentation. Okay. Okay, so tonight I am going to be talking with all of you about the power of art as a tool to communicate science. More or less, I'm going to try to stick to a program for this. Tonight, I am going to lean towards focusing on the skill set of artists and what they can bring to the table. Since I'm an artist, I'll be diving into this presentation from that POV. So I'm going to cover a couple of key points tonight. One is the power of art as a tool to communicate science. A few examples of art that has inspired science, the idea of collaboration between both disciplines, and then some examples of SciComm projects that I've done in collaboration with scientists. And they're mostly videos, and I'll be bringing those out towards the end of the presentation. So, artists. Artists are trained to develop critical thinking and observational skills that are needed to extrapolate information from the physical world and translate it through a medium. So that's the essence of what an artist is trained to do. Artists have to master visual literacy. Visual literacy is the process of deriving meaning from a visual object. And that sounds, pretty straightforward, but it's actually an abstract concept. Artists are taught to scrutinize every single detail that they observe. Which direction is light coming from? What degree angle does this street take from the position where I'm standing? Artists observe the world with a very high level of attention to detail. And sometimes artists see things that a casual observer completely misses. So, when you first look at this, I'm sure immediately your response is, oh, wow, what a beautiful landscape. And it really is a gorgeous landscape. This is a watercolor done by an artist named Jill Pelto. She's an artist and a scientist, actually. But what you're looking at, if you look a little bit more closely, are some data points. This is actually an infograph. It's a stunning infograph. She makes these gorgeous works of art to communicate climate data, some really complex data as well. So by embedding a data message in these paintings, these works become kind of a Trojan horse for science to reach the public, folks who don't necessarily think about data points and models. This becomes a really accessible medium to communicate data. We also usually look at climate data in pixels, right? Like in spreadsheets and in maps. But this artist combines gorgeous imagery. I mean, this really is beautiful from the natural world with hard data. And these are all meant to show the impact that climate change is having. So, I mean, each one of these pieces on their own could hang on your wall, right? As standalone art, but each one of them tells a profound story about climate change. And I really love this method. Cyanotypes. So again, these look like beautiful pieces of artwork, and they genuinely are. This is a cameraless photography technique called cyanotype. And what we're looking at here is the artwork of Anna Atkins. She was a botanist and also a photographer. At the time that she was creating these beautiful cyanotypes, is 1840s, early 1840s. The only kind of medium that was being used sort of to depict scientific elements from the natural world were illustrations. And so she was seeking a more accurate way to communicate elements from nature. And she started to utilize this method, the cyanotype method, to capture marine organisms. She also had the foresight to document hundreds of specimens and put them together in a book. She made an actual book containing some 300 handmade cyanotypes that she accrued over a decade. And that seems like a pretty practical thing to do, you know, collect lots of images and data and stick it into a book. But at the time that this was done, it was, you know, quite revolutionary. And in fact, she created the very first book to contain photographs in it, and paved the way for photography's role in communicating science. And so this is really sort of a beautiful culmination of meticulous observation, data collection, and presentation all at once. And I mean, I would hang any one of these on my wall. They're stunning. They're absolutely stunning. And if you think about all the different photography books that exist today that have, you know, that are utilized for scientific record, it's, you know, we can really thank Anna Atkins for being the pioneer to do this sort of thing. So science has had a tremendous impact on art, right? The advent of better chemistry and technology has given artists improved tools with which to create. But I think the impact that art has had on science is a little bit less obvious. So I want to quickly just take a look at a couple of examples. This. Let's start with my favorite. So you may or may not immediately recognize what you're looking at here. These are painstakingly illustrated, beautiful models of neurons. And the artist is Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He's a really, you know, labeled the grandfather of neuroscience, and essentially pioneered modern neuroscience as we know it today. Cajal actually ventured into science as an artist. He was a trained artist first. Scientists during his time who were examining brain preparations, they perceived a wild tangle of continuous fibers when they were observing. And they had come up with different theories about how the brain worked based on this, you know, chaotic mesh of stuff that they were observing. But Cajal observed his slides with an artist's keen eye for discerning form and function amid chaos. And what he saw were neurons. And he was the first person to identify that the nervous system is made up of discrete individual cells, not a chaotic mesh of mess. And this is a discovery that came to be known as the Neuron Doctrine. This was all the way in the 1890s. So it was his artistic foresight that century until the electron microscope was invented to finally confirm that what he had seen in his mind and carefully sketched out on thousands of stunning diagrams was accurate. And incredibly, his drawings are still used today to teach neuroscience. So again, it's this scrutiny that an artist brings to the table that gave Cajal a really unique approach at looking, and because of that different way of thinking, that unorthodox out of the box way of thinking, he was able to see through the mess and make this incredible discovery. Oops, sorry. Skipping around here. There we go. Chelsea Bonestall, one of my favorite space artists. Chelsea was an artist and an illustrator who created paintings depicting astronomical scenes and spaceflight explorations decades before the first manned missions. He really played a tremendous role in inspiring scientists and the general public, which is very important, with regard to space exploration. His artwork depicted future realities with uncanny precision. Really, really had a knack for sort of having a vision for what was possible, what seemed impossible, but what actually, was possible. He seemed to know, for example, the importance that rockets would have in space travel. And in addition, how rockets would burn in stages before separating. His lunar landers, which I didn't include any images of here, but I encourage you to look up. His lunar landers were also reasonably realistic for having been imagined in 1951. Bonestall was said to have influenced and inspired scores of scientists. Carl Sagan said that he didn't know what other worlds looked like until he saw Bonestall's paintings of the solar system. So he had a really, really tremendous impact on people who would come around and be very important to the science communication world as well as science exploration. So this picture, this image on the left that you see of the rocket that's been landed, it's called Conquest of Space. That's from 1949. And so if you recall, the first rocket to actually launch something into space was the one that sent Sputnik up, and that was in 1959. So this is, just shy of a decade before such a thing could happen. And if you look at the structure of this rocket, it's pretty good. It's pretty well imagined. Collaboration. So probably what most people are tuned in to hear about tonight. Science and art are generally most often seen as disciplines with very little in common. But artistic and scientific creativity are closely correlated. They're closely correlated both, in terms of psychological profiles, in polymath tendencies, and also in mental strategies. Many people who have pursued both art and science have said that one discipline often informs their work in the other. Some important key things to consider. Good art and good science necessarily require high degrees of specialization. This is really important, a very important point with regard to collaboration. A good scientist and a good artist both have to spend a large portion of their life or their career focusing on one thing, right? So you can't expect to be a brilliant, great artist if you aren't really focused on doing the work and being disciplined. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment. So you really can't be phenomenally great at both things, unless you're Leonardo da Vinci, right? Which many of us aren't. And so what comes into play, what becomes really important is the concept of collaboration. If we had large numbers of scientists who didn't think like scientists, that would be a problem, right? It's the same for art and for artists. But by creating spaces in which both scientists and artists can work together and communicate and learn from each other, both science and art can benefit. So the idea here is you don't have to be a great artist if you're a scientist. The important thing is to focus on your science and be open to collaborating with someone who specializes in art just the way you specialize in your science, and having that deep and mutual respect for each other's special skill set and what, you know, each person can bring to the table. So I only just have one example of collaboration here in my presentation tonight. This is John Lundberg, who many people probably instantaneously recognize as Carl Sagan's right-hand man. Carl is an excellent science to reference with regard to collaboration. And John Lundberg, he is a space artist, but he's also a science journalist. And he was Carl's principal artistic collaborator for, I don't know, some 20 some odd years. He also contributed art to Voyager's Golden Record. It's another thing that people know him by. But Carl cherished and appreciated the work of artists, and he depended on creatives to help him breathe life into all of the things that he left us. You know, the most timeless, cherished works of SciComm, you know, the cosmos especially. If you see this image of, well, we have John Lundberg on screen. The other image is a piece of his artwork that is from the Cosmos series that you might recognize off the bat. He did a lot of really brilliant paintings and illustrations and brought some of these concepts to life visually. And it was one of the first times that the public got to consume these sorts of things in that fashion. It's hard to think about science communication without thinking of Carl. And, you know, he didn't just work with John Lundberg, he worked with many, many artists. He had whole teams of artists that he worked with for almost all of his projects. And so that took a certain level of openness to consider that there's a skill set that was outside of his reach, to respect and appreciate the work that, you know, creative people could lend to his vision, and that they could support and enhance his message. And I think these are the kinds of things that just seem really practical, but honestly, when you think about collaboration, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing, especially across different disciplines. And so artists have to step a little bit towards the scientists and understand that scientific method is rigid, and that there are facts that are really important that can't be changed or altered. You know, that is something that an artist probably, you know, really has to step towards the center with, because we are generally trained to challenge the status quo. I mean, that is exactly what an artist is trained to do, is to question everything and to challenge the status quo. And so that doesn't always work out for a scientist. But a bit of that is really good for a scientist to also embrace. Okay, so we look at it differently now. You know, we'll have this new perspective and a new way of thinking about things. A lot of science organizations are now including artists in residency. So CERN is doing in their space now. creating artworks based on the research that's going on at CERN. And it has been, it's had a very positive impact on the scientists who probably don't have a tremendous opportunity to be around eccentric artists, pitching wild and different ideas at them about their research. And so, and I think SETI, I believe SETI is also doing something very similar with artists. They are very active on the internet with SciArt. So this sort of idea of being open to different disciplines is really the key, the sweet spot for collaboration. So I get this sort of, I get a lot of questions from scientists or from folks in the science community about how they can collaborate. How do I collaborate with an artist? How do I make that happen? So I'm going to give you just a couple of basic pointers. And if you have specific questions about this, like, please, note it down. And when we get to the Q&A, I'm happy to answer all of them. But here's like a couple of real basic things that for you to consider. Use the internet. Absolutely use the internet. Follow artists. Follow them. There are artists all over Instagram and Twitter. If you're a scientist and your feed is only just full of scientists, change that. Change that tonight. Change that tomorrow. Go find artists to follow. You will be very happy to have beautiful things pop up in your feed. And also, it's a wonderful way to stay in touch with what's going on in a world outside of your own. Connect with artists whose work you appreciate. I think this is kind of a really important point that people might, not think about specifically. There are a lot of different kinds of artists. Some art will resonate with you and some art will not resonate with you. And I think it's important to think about that. And it's really important to follow the artists that are making things that do resonate with you. If you love space art, there are phenomenal space artists all over Twitter and Instagram. And I strongly suggest that you follow them. And look at the kinds of art that they're making. Think about how that sort of art applies to a project where you might want to collaborate with an artist. Artists, they're stylistically, artists can span a tremendous range. And so this is something important to think about and to consider. Also, some artists specialize in a specific medium. So if you have a job or a project that requires an illustrator, make sure that you're looking at illustrators and the work that illustrators are doing. If you're looking for 3D rendering, that's very specific. Not every artist is going to be able to do that. And so it's the same with the sciences. Like if you're studying pulsars, let's say, and somebody, that you're having a conversation with that's not in your field or is not in sciences, you're just letting them know, oh yeah, I study pulsars. And they say, oh, I just bought a brand new telescope. Can you, tell me how to use it? And meanwhile, you have to explain, well, I do my work from a laptop, like, in an office. And they're sort of, shocked and surprised. There's a wide disconnect to understanding the nature of the work that you do as a scientist. I'm sure plenty of times, I'm sure all of you have stories like that. And for us in the arts, we have the same kinds of stories. When I say I'm an illustrator, people will oftentimes say, oh, can you build my website? No, actually, I can't. That's not what I do. But, it's not an easy connection to make. So think about things like that. What kind of artists? Do a little bit of research, figure out what sort of art you're looking for, and make sure that if you are going to reach out to someone, that this is work that they actually do. It'll be helpful. Reach out to artists for sure, but definitely know your stuff. Do a little bit of research, respect that person's time. And I think if you know a bit about what they do ahead of time, it's going to soften up and, create a little bit of warmth in the conversation. I think it'll be appreciated. Compensation is a really important thing to think about and to remember. This in particular, and I'll tell you from personal experience, this is a particularly sensitive issue for artists. Artists are often considered people who just, float around, whatever, sipping wine and, doing things out of hobby. It's not, it is a societal sort of narrative, and it's an uncomfortable one, to say the least. I'm trying to think of the most diplomatic way to say it. It's a very uncomfortable attachment that people put on artists, that our profession is sort of just a hobby. We don't really work that hard, and just do a painting, it's no big deal. A tremendous amount of effort and energy and passion and work goes into creating a piece of art, and so many things have to be taken into consideration to do it. And so be very respectful if you reach out to an artist, and understand that this is as important of a contribution to a project as any other aspect of your project, and try to keep that in mind. So I am going to move on to showing you all a couple of things that I've done, that I've collaborated with scientists on. So these are videos. I'm going to start with a video that I worked on with a scientist named Emily Costa. She's a cancer researcher and an aspiring writer. She works at Sloan Kettering. She's an incredible science communicator, and she wrote this script. It's a short 1-minute film that we did about Beatrix Potter, who you probably know as the author of the Peter Rabbit children's books, but was also deeply inspired by mycology, and hand painted hundreds of beautiful, scientifically accurate works of art that depicted mushrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up for you guys.
The biological study of fungi has taught us that even without a microscope, there is much more to mushrooms than meets the eye. Though mushrooms are often mistaken for plants, they're actually fungi, which diverged evolutionarily from other eukaryotes over 1 billion years ago. The mushroom, or fruiting body, makes up only a small part of the organism. The much larger mycelium, composed of fibrous hyphae, absorbs nutrients from decomposing matter. During propagation, genetic material, packaged in spores, is dispersed away from the fruiting body to seed new ground and produce offspring. Some of what we know about mushrooms can be credited to Beatrix Potter, who painted hundreds of finely detailed, scientifically accurate illustrations of fungi, some of which we've shown here. Though Beatrix may be less remembered for her contributions to mycology, their value is indisputable. Her watercolors are still a resource for scientists today.
So that was one quick little 1-minute video. Scientist, she wrote that script, and also she has a big passion for telling the stories of women in science. She also wrote the next script, which I'm going to share. This is more of an example of telling a story. The images from the next quick clip come from the Science History Institute. They're an incredible group that has a tremendous, they used to be called the Chemical Heritage Foundation. They have a tremendous archive of scientific instruments that go way, way, way back to medieval times. And they also have a tremendous archive of photographs. And we started looking through some of these photographs to consider what sort of story we might be able to tell from them. And we came across a bunch of unnamed women. And in the process of trying to figure out who some of these women are, we found a couple of stories, which is very interesting. All of the men in this archive, by the way, shown doing science, they all had names and titles associated to them. Many, if not all of the women were unnamed and untitled in the video. So this was a really exciting project to be involved with. It required looking into some historical figures, some unnamed women, and the same scientist who wrote the script from the previous film wrote this script too. She also did the legwork to find some of these folks, figure out what they were up to. She did very interesting research to uncover who these women are. And there will be we're working on several more episodes of this. It's just a 1-minute teaser here.
To be a scientist is to possess burning curiosity, tireless perseverance, and fearlessness to upset the status quo. The Wilson College Chemistry Club, whose members went on to occupy male-dominated fields as clinicians and laboratory assistants, knew this, as did Jeanette Clark, whose work as a technician in a New York City hospital drove an initiative to diagnose and drastically reduce childhood lead poisoning. We can look too to Evelyn Kiefer, a laboratory assistant who studied the distillation of pine resin for industry and manufacturing at the Hercules Powder Company, and to Dr. Betty Washington Green, the first African-American woman to attain the title of senior research chemist at Dow Chemical, and whose studies on latex and polymers earned her multiple patents. But from this laboratory technician, whose name we do not know, we can learn another truth these women acknowledged, that in their scientific careers, they would be overlooked, made invisible, and have their achievements diminished or misattributed to their male peers. So many women, despite their vital contributions, their pioneering discoveries and innovations, and their legacies as torchbearers for the next generation, are mere footnotes in the scientific record, or missing from it entirely. But if we can reach backwards and amend the narrative by uncovering their names, their images, their stories, then we can remember them for their proudest moments and recognize them fully as they truly were, as curious, as persistent, as fearless, as scientists.
So that's sort of not necessarily communicating the science, but talking about the scientists. So you can really get flexible working on SciComm projects. The next one that I'm going to show you is just a fast, really quick little bumper. It's a script written by Chris Sundrick. He's a biomedical engineer. And this was for an opening, sort of an intro to a film screening where we were showing a bunch of science films together. And it's meant to sort of just get people excited about science. Let me start that over. So that was fun little SciComm video. Sorry, I am having a slight technical problem with my videos. Bear with me for a moment. Okay. The next video I'm going to share was also written by Chris Sunderick, the same biomedical engineer who wrote the script for the last one. This is a quick video sort of highlighting the problem that we have with plastic currently. And we did this also as a project, a local project to raise awareness for recycling and doing our best to mitigate the damage that plastic has. So sorry, that one always kind of hits home. That plastic video. And the last video that I'm going to share is one that I wrote to supplement an education series. And it's meant to draw lines between music and mathematics. And so I'm going to show you this one really quick.
Mathematics underlies everything in our world. It is the study of the collection of all possible patterns. Some of these patterns present themselves between shapes, some between numbers, some are in the synergy between the most elementary particles of matter, and some, rather harmonious patterns, occur between intervals of sound. In the 6th century BC, Pythagoreans found 3 particular relationships between notes especially pleasing. We know them now as the ratios of perfect intervals: an octave, a perfect fifth, and a perfect fourth. These beautiful musical relationships are also mathematical relationships, or inherent basic ratios that exist within different pitches. And we can see these ratios on an instrument, for example, by measuring the lengths of a vibrating string. In an octave, the string lengths create a ratio of 2 to 1. In a perfect fifth, the ratio is 3 to 2. And in a perfect fourth, the ratio is 4 to 3. Every interval can be broken down using mathematical ratios, and we can use ratios to find any interval. If we want to find the octave of the pitch, 440 hertz, which we call an A, we would solve for that frequency by using the 2-to-1 ratio. 440 times 2 equals 880, which is the frequency of the A 1 octave above. To the Pythagoreans, the idea that simple ratios produced harmonious sounds was an indication that there was a hidden order underlying the natural world made entirely of numbers, a profound insight that mathematicians and scientists continue to explore today.
So yeah, just sort of touching on that basic, age-old argument, is mathematics discovered, or is it something that we've invented? And that concludes my presentation for the evening. And so Sophia's coming back on, yeah? Hi.
Thank you so much, Ray. This was awesome. I hope that Ray inspired you all to reach out to artists and do some collaborations, which I'm doing with Ray as well. So if you liked any of her videos and you like space, stay tuned. And so we're going to open it up to questions. There's one that was dropped in the Q&A box. It's a little bit long, so I'll read it. I think we have enough time to do this. So Sergey says, thank you for your great presentation. We used to be taught that one should always focus on data when presenting quantitative information. For example, there's classic book on this topic. Okay, there's a book on this topic called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information by Edward
Tufte. Yep, I'm familiar.
Yeah, Tufte. Got thanks. The author of this book would probably argue that the climate change example that you showed in your presentation right now, Ray, that it should be stripped of unnecessary decorations because they take attention away from the data points. So here's the question. Do you have any good examples when making quantitative data look more visually appealing with decorations makes a key difference in driving the research progress? This question is specifically about like plots and graphs and things that you visualize data with.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And the answer is extremely nuanced. So Edward Tufte comes from sort of a very specific school of data visualization. He's not an artist. I've taken his courses before. He really focuses on data viz, and for good reason. His concept, or what drives the essence of his concept, is that we don't need to have anything sort of creating fluff, if you will, within visuals to communicate data. Edward Tufte's focus, however, is not on the general public broadly. He's speaking more to people who are going to be publishing data points and data findings more or less within the academic realm. Not necessarily, but more or less. And so the point there would be, yes, you're likely not going to use a watercolor plot map in an academic textbook. Although, in my opinion, it's still beautiful and useful. The example of the climate graph is actually meant to communicate to your average person, the person who's out there who never looks at data, the person who's out there who, if they saw a beautiful, clean, piece of data viz, wouldn't even actually react to it because it's not within their reach, right? And so to answer your question, it depends on the audience. And I think that that is part of why collaborating with an artist is so important, because these are the kinds of things that artists have to think about with regard to communications or external communications. It really depends on the audience. I love Edward Tufte. I love his books, all of them. They're all incredible. I think he's got 4 or 5 books. The one that you mentioned is his more famous one, but they are all brilliant. And there are some really artistic representations of data in some of his books. I think also his point is, don't add anything that detracts from the data. So as far as is it right or wrong to do, that's a very relative point, and it truly depends on the audience.
That was a really great and informative answer. Thanks, Ray. So another question here is from Natalia Guerrero. She's asking, can you recommend grants or other funding structures which scientists can use to sustain collaborations with artists?
Yeah, this is a question that I get a lot of the time. I am not, sadly, I'm not broadly familiar with the process for academic grants. And I understand, I speak to so many people who have this problem. I understand it's really, really difficult to allocate funds to art. It's just the way that academia has been built out, and it's just the way that the structure exists today. There are people out there who specialize in doing this. I should have probably come prepared for this question because I get it all the time. But there are people who have really great suggestions, and I think there's an online course about this too. I'm gonna have to look into it, and maybe we can try to get you that answer. But there are people who specialize in different ways that you can underwrite specifically for creative assets when you're applying for academic grants. It's not an easy thing to do yet. We're all hoping that this sort of thing changes because collaboration is so necessary. And the more you collaborate with artists and the more public-facing projects that you do collaborating with artists, the easier it's going to get to start pushing sort of the archaic framework of academia into these, into a more open setting for grants. Grants are difficult to get to begin with, and allocating funds to art is even more difficult. But I appreciate that question, and please do look, do a couple of quick searches online and see if you find anything. I will try to get you an answer on that.
Thanks again for that answer, Ray. So we have one more question from, I might mispronounce this, but I'm going to try my best. Heriberto Flores Zuleta. I'm Canadian, and so my second language is French. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you for taking the time to give this talk. As a chemist trying to learn to make graphics and have aesthetics be central to my data visualization, do you recommend any books on the fundamentals of typography, composition, color theory, etc., etc.?
I mean, that's heavy. That's a heavy thing. Honestly, I would recommend working with an artist. That would really be my recommendation. Typography, I mean, that's a specialized job in itself. That's something that a person has probably, done 10 to 15 years of study and applied work to become a specialist at. I don't even touch typography. I mean, it's such a specific thing. Even for myself, that I illustrate and create all different kinds of art, when I have something specific like that I need guidance for, I always consult with a typography specialist or a designer or a graphic designer who specializes in typography. There are so many great books that you can read. There are lots of crash courses on graphic design. Most of what you were talking about there is related to graphic design. But to become a specialist at something like that would be a really difficult thing to do. I think in most cases, your best bet is to go and find someone who is doing that incredible work. Look for designers on the internet and maybe, generously hit them up with some questions or ask them if they've got some time to do an informational phone call with you. Artists do stuff like that. An informational phone call is something you can absolutely ask. When the pandemic, makes its way through, you can offer to buy someone a cup of coffee for an informational session. You will probably derive 2 and 3 and 4 times the amount of information from a conversation with a designer than you will from reading books. With that said, there are many excellent titles out there that you can scroll through, give it a Google search and look for the ones that are best rated. I'm sure you'll find something really excellent to whet your palate. But to get really good answers to your questions and to really sharpen your knowledge of these things, the best thing you can do is form a relationship with an artist and have good conversations and ask them all the nitty-gritty questions.
So the moral of the story is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate.
Yeah. Yes.
Great.
I mean, let's build a community together. We need each other. Let's do it. And I know it's easy to think, well, let me read a book on it. And sure, it can't hurt. It's a wonderful thing to do. Absolutely do it. If you have the time and the capacity to invest in that, I think that's a great thing to do. But always remember that you can consult with an actual person who does this kind of work, and you might learn so much more, and you might make a great friend, and it could lead to collaboration. And really, it's just a really good route to take.
Yeah, definitely. I really love that. I love that response. It's like encouraging people to collaborate. It's really cool. But somebody did drop a link in there with in the question and answer area. So it's not a question, but you can actually get that link there's a data visualization book.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And so at this point, we don't have any more written questions. So I want to turn it to the audience. You can use the raise hand thing and we'll call on you, and so you can ask any questions. Do we have any?
Art openings, that's a good point. So Edward just said, go to art openings. That's where I meet a lot of collaborators. That's a wonderful, wonderful point. Edward, thank you for sharing that. Yes, go to art openings. Obviously, we're still, going through this pandemic, and so it makes that sort of thing difficult. But sometime in the future, when we're able to have art openings again, that is a wonderful recommendation. Absolutely do that. There's probably a ton of art events going on in your community at any given time. Even if it's a small scale coffee shop that's putting up, artwork inside, it's a really great opportunity to go, and not just for the artist who is displaying artwork, but you may meet their friends who are also artists and do different kinds of art. So that was a very, very good point.
Great. Do we have any final questions? Okay, and with that, I want to graciously thank Ray Richards for giving us our first talk of this year in the Science Communication series. It was wonderful to have you, and I hope that this sparks some interest in collaborating with art, and because it was a beautiful melding of science and art that we got to hear today, and I hope that inspired you all. And this series is continuing, and so if you're not following us on social media, please, you can follow the School of Physical Sciences, which is just at UCI PhysSci, so that's PHYSSCI, and you'll get all this information. You can also follow our departments, because we also tweet about these things and share them on Instagram, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.